Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel, and this is my godforsaken co-host, Abram Biener, and today we're here to talk about the history of Wii U ports on Nintendo Switch and how sort of our thoughts have changed on the oeuvre of Wii U ports on Switch over the course of the Switch's life cycle. But if you want to talk to us about Nintendo, the Switch, the Wii U, let me get my gamepad, or anything else at all, you can join our Discord. The link is in the top of the description. And while you're down there, you can ring the bell, you can subscribe, and you can join the Discord again, just for good measure. Just for good measure. Got to make sure you do it twice in case you mess up the first time, whatever. So, Abram, you are a contentious individual when it comes to your opinions on Wii U ports on Nintendo Switch, at least to me. You and I have had conversations about this multiple times throughout the history of the Switch, and your opinions have changed quite drastically as more ports have been added to Switch, and you have subsequently played all of them, maybe. So I'm very interested in hearing what your first thoughts are on this topic as a whole, because I believe you have a quote from yourself about this topic.
November 12th, 2017, from penguinswithcapes.blogspot.com on the article entitled, quote, "Stop porting Wii U games to Switch."
There we go.
The Nintendo Switch is in a good place right now. The system is selling very well, the library of games is praised left, right, and center, and for once, the industry is fully behind Nintendo. Still, as I've railed against already, an unfortunate amount of Nintendo Switch content is borrowed from the previous console. Two of the tentpole Switch releases, Mario Kart and Pokken, were pulled from the Wii U alone, and Breath of the Wild launched simultaneously in both consoles. Many people believe that the trove of Wii U games can and should be dipped back into in order to get more games on Switch. Personally, I see this as a lazy fallback to bolster the Switch's library. Quantity over quality isn't the right move for Nintendo, and ports come off as little more than filler.
Well, there's exactly one thing that I took away from that. I had already heard that. I'd probably read that article at one point in my life, so it's no surprise to me, though it might be jarring and shocking to the audience. So I have to make sure that I put this video with a disclaimer, viewer discretion,
a trigger warning,
spicy shit in this video. But the one thing I took away from that is that you considered Pokken Tournament DX to be one of the tentpole titles of the Nintendo Switch's first year.
Yes, this was written like, what, 3 weeks after Odyssey came out? So there's fucking very little things I consider to be a tentpole title in the console at that point outside of, I'm sure I mentioned Splatoon. I really don't want to go back and read any more on work. I get fucking war flashbacks if I do. Tucker, I have grown a lot as a man in the years since 2017. No, it's actually gotten significantly shorter than back when I was a fucking 16-year-old. But my opinion, Tucker, has basically flipped entirely.
It's fascinating.
Does that track along how much the bit block content I consume? I think it might just be happenstance, but I think that as I've gotten older and started to think about the Switch in a more, intellectual way, and I actually evolve as a critic, the Wii U ports serve a very particular niche in the Switch's library, and I think that now that we're kind of sitting on the backside of them, there's very few games other than like Xenoblade Chronicles X or Woolly World that you can conceivably port over. Looking back on them, I think they were very important to getting the Switch to where it is right now.
Sure, no, yeah. It's fascinating for me as someone who, let me check, owns a Wii U, but I was not someone who played a lot of the first-party games on the Wii U, and I believe I'm not alone in that. The Wii U obviously didn't sell very well, and most of the games on it didn't sell very well either. Subsequently, they had a cap of 13 million, which is the average selling rate of a Nintendo Switch first-party title. So that's not uncommon. But even as someone who was a Nintendo fan at the time and had a Wii U, it was a smash machine for me, first and foremost, and used for playing my Wii games again. I didn't really feel the draw to go back and play a lot of these games because I didn't have my own money at the time. Right. But the Switch, I think, came out at a perfect time for me to be introduced to a wider array of Nintendo's titles and to have the Wii U titles be recontextualized in a way that was a better form factor. The Switch and its portability and the accessibility of me playing it at school, and the fact that you weren't, although we do love the Wii U gamepad, weren't encumbered with touch controls and motion controls as much, made those games a lot more accessible and playable. And well, I think there's a question mark to be placed on the fact that a lot of these games from the Wii U are basically sold as new games. They're promoted alongside. They're sold at full price. They don't have Nintendo Selects in the spine or anything. I think there is a lot of reason to believe that selling them essentially as new titles gives them that new breath of life that not only recontextualizes how much people care about Wii U's library, but also how wide the Switch's library is. Because when you play the Nintendo titles on this game, if a fourth of them are Wii U ports, but they're still all great games, that just means you've got a great library. And I think that's where I come down on it. Like almost every game I've played on the Switch has been new to me, port or not. And frankly, if I hadn't been cognizant of Nintendo at the time, I wouldn't have known they were ports.
Here's the thing, Tucker.
Yes.
You're right.
My Wii U gamepad away.
You're right, but your opinion doesn't matter. And my opinion doesn't matter.
Yes.
And the reason is because the Wii U sold 13 million copies, 13 million units. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold 38 million units. That is the open and shut book on whether or not Wii U ports were a good idea. It doesn't, everything you're saying about form factor and playability doesn't matter. Everything I was saying and back in 2017 about them being a bad idea doesn't fucking matter, because this single game outsold the Wii U itself 3-1 and is the biggest selling Mario Kart game, period. And today,
it will continue to be.
Almost 5 years later, it sells for $59.99 and moves millions and millions and millions of units every fucking quarter.
Yes.
So I think what was very clear from the highest level is that this was the financial decision Nintendo needed to make.
And that's a decision of a lifetime, so it's that.
Yes. What you're saying, I think, really gets to the heart of why I think these ports, in retrospect, were very useful.
Sure.
They are far more playable here. Now, I think that there's exceptions where that isn't true. For instance, I think Pikmin 3 Deluxe is the best version of the game, but I think it might actually be more playable in Wii U. We were just talking recently on Bill B about Captain Toad Treasure Tracker maybe being in a similar situation in some respects. I don't think that the Wii U ports across the board were a clean improvement.
Sure.
But as you're saying, you are the Switch consumer.
Yes,
you're not a lapsed Nintendo fan by any stretch of the imagination, but you came to these franchises and these games in particular as them being new experiences. And ultimately, your word is the word that motivated Nintendo to do all this in the first place. Because they knew they captured brand new fans, they captured fans like you that just scraped the surface of these libraries, they captured lapsed Nintendo fans who hadn't touched a Nintendo system since maybe N64, maybe GameCube. And because of that, the imperative was there to grow the library like this.
Yeah, it's interesting for me as someone who loves looking back at Nintendo's history, where the focus has shifted to making sure that ports exist. And I think the new expectation that ports will happen and that they will be good and will be sold at a certain quality and all of this. Nintendo has created something very new here, because you look back at, frankly, almost any other Nintendo system, the ports or the remakes or the remasters are a rarity amongst the bunch. And you can say what you will about that being a significant portion of the Switch's library, but I do think that a lot of these games are strong enough and these ports are good enough that I see this as a net positive, not only for the Switch's library, but for these games. When I look back at N64 games or GameCube games, and I just wish that there was the care put into them that Wii U ports have had on Switch, it makes me yearn for more. Even if it is recycled content, even if you can put that, okay, this shouldn't be sold at full price because it is an old game, and that is an argument to be had, and I think we should talk about it a little bit here. I think that what Nintendo has done with ports is very good and sets a gold standard for the most part. The handful like Pikmin 3 or Captain Toad are shaky at worst, but I think at best the accessibility of the Switch and the improvements of the form factor outweigh those, at least to me. I feel very little draw to pull out my Wii U and play Pikmin 3, even if it is sitting right behind me. But if I have my Switch, I can take that sucker with me on the plane, play Pikmin 3 all the way through and not blink twice about it. I mean, I probably blinked a couple times while playing that game, but that categorically improved my experience, even if I couldn't use the Wiimote for aiming, pointing controls. That playing it on the plane was better than not playing it at all.
No, I think you're totally right. And I think what it comes down to is Nintendo had a very good opportunity here. Because, as you were saying, there really aren't that many Nintendo libraries with ports to this extent.
Oh,
The
there are none.
well, there is one, the
Oh, well,
GBA.
no, that's a good point.
And what's interesting about the GBA is that it was in a very similar position to where the Switch is, in the sense of the GBA on a power level was very similar to an SNES, right? In terms of you could, with pretty close parity, bring games over. You know, that's how we ended up getting the Mario Advance titles. It's why we ended up getting these F-Zero games that tracked very much in the footsteps of the original F-Zero. We got so many ports from third parties, the Final Fantasy games and all of this. We got the entire NES Classic series on GBA, all these ports. I think the thing is, Nintendo's hardware is usually so radically different that it's not easy to seamlessly move this content across.
Yeah.
Or they're so radically intrinsically similar that there's no sense to, in the case of the GameCube to the Wii. You can just chuck your GameCube disc into the 100%. Wii. Now, on that, in the case of that system, we still ended up getting the new Play Control titles, which was actually a pretty good selection. You know, your Jungle Beats, your Mario Power Tennises, your Pikmins, Metroid Prime even got them. Chibi Robo in Japan. I wish that had come to the West. That would have been so fucking cool. But the thing about it is, Nintendo, like in these other key instances, had a great opportunity to repurpose this content, and even more than before, they had the imperative to do so. Yeah. Because they realized that, as you're saying, the form factor here is so much better. Yeah. It's not just like it's if the Switch was just a rigid home console device, I think these ports would feel a lot less valuable. But I think Nintendo had that financial imperative to bring them over. But as you're saying, they also had a way to recontextualize these games and make them more appealing. You can play these games in handheld, as you're saying, on the plane when you go to school, all this stuff. And so it really was a very analogous situation to GBA, where these older, more static libraries could be put in this greatest hits context and also fill gaps in what would have otherwise been pretty empty release calendars.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think about how, and we actually had a conversation about this that was scrapped at one point, but how Nintendo's recent catalog has seemed to lean too heavily into regionalized content, but that really isn't the Wii U ports at this point. 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is not only a phenomenal port, but the only one that we've gotten this year, if I'm remembering correctly.
I'm gonna say yes.
I think it is.
Say yes.
Only Wii U port, because we're getting reutilized content from other places, and maybe that's sort of the idea of recapturing older games on newer hardware, bleeding over from the success of Wii U ports. Which may not be a great thing. But when you look at release calendars like 2019 or 2017 with the Wii U ports in there, those are still pretty good Switch-only calendars, but the Wii U ports, I think, bolster them. And I think that's because a lot of those Wii U games are great games.
They are fantastic games.
This isn't them polishing up Ultra Smash and Star Fox Zero to get them to reach a new audience. This is them adding more content to games that are already great. Different degrees of new content. But with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Pokken Tournament, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, even something like Bowser's Fury, there's reasons even for the people who played the game on that console to play them here outside of just the form factor change. Adding that content and also recontextualizing it for the hardware and putting a lot of clear care into them makes them feel right at home on the Switch, which I think is the most impressive thing about this.
I'm with you in the broad stroke. I think that the question of how much content was added is where I still maintain some of my older positions on these ports.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that there is a humongous swing in how beneficial these ports actually are.
Okay.
You have the likes of
Let's talk about that spectrum.
Yeah, let's talk about that spectrum. Yeah, at the high end, you have things like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which not only add in the DLC, which is kind of a given for these ports, but add the battle mode, which for me is not only the best battle mode in the series, but a pillar of the game that has single-handedly brought dozens of hours of new gameplay for me. Then you've got things like Pikmin 3 Deluxe, which in spite of its control issues, I think is just such a rich expansion upon that game with the difficulty modes, the co-op, the side stories and everything. And Bowser's Fury is a brand new 6-7 hour Mario campaign. And even throwing things like Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, which takes all of the somewhat unplayable Legends content because that game was just not meant for 3DS and puts it in 60 FPS, HD on Switch. That's all great. But then you swing down to the low end and you've got things like Funky Mode in Tropical Freeze. And you have Captain Toad Treasure Tracker not only taking out certain bonus levels like the 3D World levels, but also adding, and this is not an exaggeration, in the base game 15 minutes of new Odyssey themed levels. Now we ended up getting that DLC drop, which was pretty substantive, but special episode. But I just think that there was not on that front consistency in making what are categorically all great games even better. I think there's clear instances where these ports didn't quite fulfill the idea of taking a second look and fixing and adding what needed to be fixed and added.
Sure, yeah. I think when I really think about these Wii U ports that I've played and why I preferred to play them on Switch, even if I had some of them, like I have 3D World on my Wii U. I have Pikmin 3 on my Wii U. I think that even with the lack of new content in comparison to the other games, the best of the ports with your Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or your Hyrule Warriors, whatever, I still feel confident that the Switch version is on par, if not better, because of that form factor. That there is no question in my mind that I would rather play this on Switch. It is going to look better to some degree. It is going to fit this form factor. It is going to have even just an inch of new content in it that does make it, to me, the ultimate way to play these games across the board. Even if the Wii U port, how much they add pendulum swings back and forth, I think even the lowest end of that, they're still worth picking up. They're still games worth playing. They're still great games to add to the library. And frankly, the new content on that higher end is not necessary. It is, of course, very much appreciating. It should be the gold standard. They all should have that. But I don't think not having it at all, for me, is a negative on these games being ported.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me either. I mean, I own all of them, or I have it. I've sold off a couple of ones I don't really need anymore. But I think the reason that I feel like it is essential to have that new content is because Nintendo was positioning these at $60 for the most part. Course. And where that got complicated is in the case of like a Pikmin 3 Deluxe, where you could get the game selects on the Wii U eShop for $20 or get it on Switch Deluxe for $60. Now, I personally feel like all of the benefits rolled into that game justify the added price. I also think there's something to be said for these games simply maintaining that value. These are, in my opinion, full price titles. Now, there is, I think, also the argument that just because Nintendo can do something doesn't necessarily mean they should do something. And so when they do something like release, New Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe, and the game is at $60, adds the Peachette thing to the game, but also adds
Nabbit
in a way that makes it so that in a 4-player multiplayer setting, one person must play on easy mode. It makes it complicated to then look at me and say that is a $60 title there. And I think that is, in hindsight, still perhaps the largest issue with the Wii U ports as they exist on Switch. Now we've kind of closed the door on this chapter because they're still being sold at $60. I think it's high time Nintendo starts to slash the prices of these. And get people on board who didn't feel like that price hike was justified in the first place. Yeah,
I think it's interesting. I think mostly a negative that they're being sold at this full $60 price point. I mean, if you can imagine a world where these are not positioned as Nintendo Selects, but it's more clear that they're Wii U ports, but they're sold at $40 and like they're still releasing on that same schedule. I think that there is a lot of people complained, especially at the launch of the Switch, that the complaints have certainly died down as it's become more normalized. But the Switch tax that these games have is you're paying to play it on Switch. You're paying $40 more than you could if you played it elsewhere, which is, many times more in terms of money. And I was always a conscious consumer in terms of what I felt was enough new content or enough of an extending experience for me to buy it new, which was really almost never. which is not, which is only a commentary on them charging full price for these.
Yeah.
I think the exception being Captain Toad, that may be the only one. I always held back and I was like, no, I'm not going to pay $60 for this. I'll get them when I say, and they do go on sale for 45, 40 sometimes, but the cuts aren't deep enough. We do need a Nintendo Selects for the Switch. They have the library for it. They have the want for it, but the Switch is doing so well that they clearly don't need to. And these games are selling magnitudes better than almost anything else in the industry.
Yeah, and that also raises an interesting point of like, well, sure, you get these games for cheap on Wii U, but okay, 13 million of you can. One out of every
true.
8 Switch owners can almost have the benefit of buying these games for cheaper if you support Nintendo on Wii U. I think there's an easy way to spin it in the reverse where, if you have the Wii U, you get the games for cheaper. This is what they're going to cost in a standard sense. So I think that's very much a weird water to wade into because it is very subjective on that respect. I think that something I'm interested in discussing with you and getting your thoughts on now is the idea of what the Wii U ports did to a release calendar and what we're going to have in moving forward with no Wii U ports to fill holes.
Sure.
Because one of my big issues back in 2017, and I certainly felt it in 2018 when we were getting back-to-back months of Wii U ports with Hyrule Warriors into Donkey Kong Country, was that these games are filling up spots that could have gone to brand new Nintendo titles instead. That clearly wasn't true because as we've gotten further into the Switch's lifespan, the droughts are becoming more and more persistent. 2021 was an exception. But I think that what we're finding is that if these gaps aren't being filled by Wii U ports, perhaps they're being filled by a Miitopia, and that's not it's a commentary on the quality of that game, but I'm not commenting on the quality of that game in this context, only to say that maybe we'd rather that these slots were filled by Wii U ports so that Grezzo could do something other than make a Miitopia, because I think that now we're getting into a situation where there is just as much recycled content on Switch, but it's recycled content that is taking up more development resources than these Wii U ports may have been otherwise. You see what I mean?
No, yeah, it's interesting to see how it's changed, and I think is why the exact reason we're having this discussion.
Yeah.
When you look at how many ports came out in 2016, it was two. It was Pokken and Mario Kart 8. And did Hyrule Warriors release that year?
No, that was 2018.
Yes, because Fire Emblem Warriors released that year, and that would have been very strange if we got both of those in the same year.
Yeah.
And so it was 2 out of the legendary first year of the Switch. And then it slowly became more and more frequent that we were getting these ports as the launch hype died down. But I still feel like it was a good balance. I never felt like it was overtaking the Switch's library of original first party titles in any meaningful way that was upsetting me, because there's still enough content. I do think that it's interesting that the Switch has had a sort of sag in the middle of its life cycle in terms of new content, because not only were new titles not being released as frequently, we weren't getting the Wii U ports as frequently in 2019 and obviously 2020. But I do feel like we're on an upward swing with the end of 2020 or the middle of 2021 leading into 2022 being pretty crammed with different things, different ideas, revivals of of old franchises, starting of new ones, different kind of ideas. And of course, 2022 being what it is with the wave 2 of 2017/18 coming back to fruition. I don't necessarily think it was ever a problem for me, and in retrospect isn't a problem at all, because we are able to get this second wind of the Switch's life.
And I think the second one is going to be very interesting to see how it looks in 2023.
Sure.
Because now we're getting into a position where is Nintendo moving to a new piece of hardware? They say the Switch's life cycle is going to be 7 to 10 years long.
Yeah.
I don't believe them. I think that it will be closer to the 7-year mark. And then it'll probably be a situation like Game Boy Advance, again, as I mentioned earlier. I think they're very similar devices in the sense of we will keep getting games on Switch for a good 18 months, 2 years after the next system comes out. But the question for me is going to be,
I just can't wait. I just can't wait for them to say this is not a replacement for the Switch. It is another pillar, because they have done that for literally every new release of a console, and it's never true. Stop fucking lying to us. We know it's a lie.
Yeah. It is a big fucking just in case. We're gonna say this just in case type energy. But the question for me now, in hindsight, is that
the perfect just in case would have been the Wii U.
Yeah.
But they didn't even care about that. I mean, the Wii was not supported after Wii U came out. What the fuck, Nintendo?
The question for me is now this. We're still getting a lot of recycled content on Switch, but now it just isn't really Wii U ports.
Yes.
Famicom Detective Club, Miitopia, we're getting Advance Wars, we got Mario Party Superstars, BDSP, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yes.
The question for me moving forward is, because 2022, with the exception of Advance Wars, which simply got delayed into that year, we're getting basically all brand new games.
Yeah.
It looks like it is, in my opinion, probably going to end up being the strongest year of the Switch's life.
Yes.
Moving into 2023, are we in a situation where Nintendo's handheld teams are finally ready to put up titles?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we going to be in a situation where all of the Nintendo teams that are going to produce games on a cyclical cycle have then gone, and we're once again going to be into droughts? Because you think about 2018. Mm-hmm. 2018 was the year where I think the Wii U ports were most egregious. Yeah. They were filling up a lot of the calendar at a time when there was other months where there were no games or very few new games. Very clearly, we needed to buy time. Infamously, Nintendo had a hard time with the Wii U because they were not prepared for HD development. Mm-hmm. And I think we're in a similar situation where the handheld teams are not ready for Switch development. They're making an even bigger jump than Wii to Wii U was.
Yeah.
So the question is going to be, are those teams going to be ready to perform so that from here on out we go from new slates of new games to new games, 2022, 2023, 2024, new system, boom? Mm-hmm. Or is it going to be, we're going to have a great 2022 akin to 2017 and then be in another 2018, but now there aren't even any Wii U ports to fall back on?
That's a great question. I mean, if Nintendo is blowing their load next year, which they very may well be, I mess up the order of those words. Yes. I don't know if in the long run it will be a problem at all, because what I see this second wind as is a very impressive rehype of a cycle's interest, or a console's interest pretty late in its life cycle that we usually don't see. We see a ramp up of interest in terms of the PS4 feeling pretty back heavy with its first party catalog, but the Switch had a great start, a sag in the middle, and a new breath of air in 2022 that I think will catapult it to being, I mean, it already is, but one of the best selling consoles of all time, if not the best. And then that's the legacy of the Switch. If 2023 is another 2018 or even the 2019, as I think is more likely, that we are getting things delayed out of 2020, and handheld teams are starting to get their sea legs and all of that, I don't think it'll be as bad as 2018, and certainly not 2020. That I don't think even a mediocre 2023 is bad for the Switch, to be 100% honest. If we get 6 great games next year that are tentpole titles that make 2022 the best year of the Switch's life cycle, and another 2018 didn't hurt the Switch. So I mean, while it might be disappointing as a player in the moment, I don't think there's any damage in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, there's still not going to be any damage in the long run. I think you're totally right about that. But I really am speaking from a player on that point, because 2018, especially as a Wii U owner, was a pretty much a slog of a year until we got into Super Mario Party Let's Go Ultimate. Yes. But in hindsight, I think the fact that I did get to play those Wii U ports kind of made the year float a little bit more. Sure. And I just think that we're getting into a situation now where Nintendo has none of those tethers left
to lean back on.
Yeah. So it'll just be curious to see what the long term looks like. Whether that means, okay, now we're going to put these sort of B-tier studios or our sort of periphery partners, our Grezzos, our ND Cubes, and everything, on these reconfigurations of old content to fill gaps or whatever. I suppose we'll see. I think that the biggest thing that I've learned in hindsight about the Wii U ports is that they were a humongous asset to making the library and its growth as smooth as possible. And now we are without it. And I think we felt that in 2020 a lot, because Pikmin 3 Deluxe, I think, helped that year quite a bit towards the end of it, when there was Age of Calamity and kind of not a whole hell of a lot else.
Yeah.
You know, so it'll just be very curious to see what it looks like. But I think what I've come to realize is that maybe I missed those Wii U ports a little bit.
Yeah. And I think the idea of us missing them is not necessarily a criticism of what's happening now, is that they did them all already. They got them out surprisingly quick. The Wii U's library has been mined for the most part. And frankly, as someone who does enjoy Wii U ports and does see almost all of them, if not all of them, as categorical improvements, I want the Wii U's library to be mined to its fucking core. I want that mine to be drained. I would love to see Willy World, though I don't really think there's much of a chance of that happening. And Xenoblade Chronicles X, I think, is heavily rumored, if not almost confirmed. But I would even not mind them dipping into the wells of something like reconfiguring Star Fox Zero, like re-releasing Color Splash with a few tweaks. I do think that the Wii U, we've passed the tipping point where we've gotten all the must-haves, but I think that it would be nice for it to be comprehensive, for the Switch to just be the better Wii U in every facet. I mean, it is for the most part, but I do think that the Wii U's library is interesting enough that mining the dregs of it is still pretty interesting. Yeah, we don't need a fucking Ultra Smash port. We don't need a fucking Amiibo Festival port. But the C tier titles, I still think, are interesting.
I think they're interesting. I think then the question becomes something like a Star Fox Zero, which would have to be pretty fundamentally retooled to work on Switch. Is that effort worth it?
Sure.
What something I had always hoped, and it never came to fruition, was that Nintendo on 3DS would have taken the bones of Majora's Mask 3D, Star Fox 64 3D, and used those assets in that code to make a new 3D Zelda and a new Star Fox game on Switch, on 3DS. What I think would be very interesting is if we just took the code base for 3D World, now that's already on Switch, and make a 3D World sequel. I think that the 3DS did a lot of asset flip sequels already, but it was usually with the new title. So it was, let's take what we built with Link Between Worlds and make Triforce Heroes. Let's make Robobot out of Triple Deluxe, things like that. I hope that if Nintendo feels the need to fill gaps, we go that route before we go the route of putting development heft into taking a game like Star Fox Zero and pushing that forward. I think they're probably holding on to something like an F-Zero, not an F-Zero, a Xenoblade Chronicles X for when they really need it, because this is just a resource.
In case of emergency.
Yeah, it's a break in case of last thing. Because this is a resource that is about to be dried up.
Yeah.
And so I think they're going to be really deliberate with, I genuinely think that it's Xenoblade and Paper Mario Color Splash as the last ones that are feasible to bring over. Woolly World you could bring over, but they already brought it to 3DS as Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, so maybe they bring it to Switch also. But I really think that it's Paper Mario and Xenoblade, and then you're kind of done. Because anything else, Game & Wario, too much work. Nintendo Land, too much work. Star Fox Zero, too much work.
Sure.
Amiibo Festival, optically, you simply cannot bring that game forward. I just think that they're gonna have to be really careful. Or there's also stuff like, NES Remix. I think maybe the strategy might be to say, let's bring Dr. Luigi, NES Remix, Pushmo World, things like that forward. That might be the next frontier.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the interesting thing about what you said and where I kind of want to end it is the idea of backfilling with Wii U ports and looking to the future with possible, hopeful asset reusing sequels as the replacement for that backfill. Is very exciting for me.
Yeah.
As someone who has now played the vast majority of the Wii U ports, I would love to see a Treasure Tracker 2, a Pokken 2. Like, these are games that would sell incredibly well and could do very well, because the Wii U had a lot of great ideas, and these games being on Switch has exposed people to those great ideas. The Treasure Tracker well is not dried up. The Pokken well is not dried up, because fighting games are cranked out a fucking dime a dozen. Pokken could have had a sequel by now. These games are interesting and would then at that point be easier to make because they are, for the most part, asset reusing and just expansion sequels, whatever. But they're Switch titles at that point. Those are Switch original games, even if they are sequels. That puts them on that level, even if they are easier to develop with the other stuff. And God, that's, holy shit, you've really sparked something in me. That is the way to go. And I'm excited for that because I don't think it's not as unreasonable, frankly.
I don't think it's unreasonable in an environment where handheld design philosophies are going to be merging with home console design philosophies. The instances of asset flip sequels or even just incredibly iterative sequels on Nintendo's home systems is very rare. You have to look to things like fucking Donkey Konga. You have to look to weird games. Of course, the highest profile example being Galaxy 1, Galaxy 2. It's really... Yeah, even Majora's Mask is very different in comparison to the iteration between. But that is the archetype for an asset flip sequel done beautifully.
Splatoon 3.
Even Splatoon 2 to an extent. Which
Xenoblade, no, not Xenoblade. Fucking Breath of the Wild 2.
Yeah, we actually are getting some asset flips, but they're like within the context of these new games. I hope we drill a little bit deeper so we get that treasure tracker sequels you're saying, but. It's certainly it is a 3DS concept, and those are a lot of the sequels that gave 3DS momentum into the sort of twilight years of its life.
Yeah,
and then it became basically just a remaster and port machine, as it fucking unceremoniously died with all kinds of random garbage Nintendo threw onto it.
That late stage 3DS library is actually kind of fascinating, and I think kind of warrants a retrospective of its own. Not that I've played a huge portion of them, not that they were marketed well, not that they sold very well, but just that it's fucking clinging on to life with fucking super new epic yarn or whatever the fuck.
It was a death march is what it was. But every once in a while they would put a game, they just killed games sometimes. Sometimes they would they had Wii ports, as you're saying right there. They had fucking Wii U ports. But sometimes in that procession, you got a Samus Returns or you got a Shadows of Valencia. And you're like, why? You're just killing these games. But I agree with you. That is a great
I'll write that down.
Period to mine. That's a great period to mine. But I think I'm kind of spended on this topic.
Gee, I'm spent. Last thing I want to say is Nintendo, thank you for doing Wii U ports. Abram might have given you some shit. I mean, who knows? That might have affected their sales. Everyone was reading Penguins with Capes at the time, so Penguins with Capes at the time. So who knows? But in retrospect, I'm very happy with the Wii U ports on the whole. I think they really did improve my experience with the Switch, and I think that applies to a lot of Wii U of Switch owners as well. And I kind of miss them. Almost, and I wish there could have been more, but we're done. We're basically fucking done. So it's time to move on to a new era, and hopefully, the future is even brighter with all this new stuff coming.
Yeah, I agree. I miss the utility of them. I think they're really great in the library. I'll be very curious to see how Nintendo addresses a Switch that does not have this as a pillar to fall back on.
Yeah.
And I hope the answer is not just by having gaps in the release calendar, which I think is actually the likeliest scenario. But also, I'll just say that I finally beat Pikmin 3 through the Deluxe version. Now one of my favorite games of all time. Bayonetta 2, Tropical Freeze. They really served their function. Even as somebody who played to some extent or another almost every Wii U exclusive on Wii U, I got a lot of mileage out of this too. And also I played like 150 hours of Mario Kart Deluxe. So it's actually more like 100. Or was it more like 120? It's a lot. All I'm gonna say is a lot. And then you add in my Wii U hours, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Give me Mario Kart 9. Or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe DLC. Tucker, end the video, I'll keep talking.
I can't. You're recording, dumb fuck.
Oh.